Hey everybody, this is Mr. Munson. We're looking at congruent triangles again today. Concept number 5, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So we're looking at these two triangles and we'll need to be able to identify, in the drawing to the left here, there's an angle, we'll call it angle A, and it's got a single struck. If these two triangles are congruent, there has to be an angle down below that is also exactly that same measure. So if I had, as we walk through this lesson, you will hopefully be able to identify through some more additional information which angle you would mark as being congruent. Let's move on. Okay, first up is vocabulary. We're just going to add two pieces to our vocabulary list. Hopefully you have this sheet ready to go and you just add it in there. Congruent statement is a statement that shows two shapes are congruent. Okay, so here I have two triangles, and we're working with mostly triangles in this chapter, so I'm just using these two triangles as an example. These could have been pentagons or whatever. So I have two triangles, triangle ABC and triangle DEF, and I'm saying that they're congruent. So what's kind of cool is that when I write this congruency statement, which is here all the way over to the right in blue, I can tell by the way the letters are ordered that if A is here in the first spot and D is in the first spot in the other one, then those two angles have to be congruent. So I could mark them congruent. Now I wouldn't just mark them congruent because one's down at the bottom left and one's over at the bottom left on the other one. It would be coming from that congruent statement. That congruent statement tells me which angles match up. It's very important. We'll get some practice with that today. All right, let's take a look at Cpctc. Kind of fun to say. Bunch of C's with a D and a T. All right, so we got Cpctc, and stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Wow, that's a mouthful. So if I take a look, C, P, C, T, C, and that's what it stands for. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Well, that makes sense if you think about it. If I have two congruent triangles, then their corresponding parts are congruent. So take a look. I have these two triangles here, a green one and a blue one off to the right, and I'm telling you that the two triangles are congruent. So if they're congruent and they haven't been twisted or whatever, I should be able to say for in the blue triangle there is an angle B, that there has to be an angle that's congruent to it in the green one, because I've said that the triangles are congruent. So now, right off the bat, I would think it would be angle E. We'd need a little bit more information about these two triangles being congruent to assume just because B's at top, then E's at top, so they're congruent. The green one could actually be rotated around and B doesn't line up with the E. But we're going to walk through some more information in the next few moments so you can correctly do those kind of problems. Let's move on. Shapes are congruent if and only if their corresponding parts are congruent. Angles match up, sides match up. Okay, that's important. Now, to start with, if I wanted to say these two triangles or these two shapes are congruent, there's two pieces here that we haven't really talked about how it's separated. We have that squiggly line on top, which means similar, and the bottom one saying the parts are equal. Okay, so that would mean that there's angles that are equal to each other in the left and the right. There's sides on the left that match those sides on the right. So as you can tell, this one fails. These two drawings have no hope of being congruent because it's not even similar. One's a pentagon and one's a hexagon. So there's no way I'm ever going to come to a place where I say these two things are congruent. It fails similarity. Well, let's take a look at these. They have a chance to be congruent. They are similar. They're both pentagons. That's a good thing. Okay, but what I find is one is obviously larger than the other. Just visually, you can tell it. Like if this was a 5, this one over here is a 10. You can tell it's twice the size of it. So there's no hope of these things being congruent because, well, the corresponding sides are not equal to each other. So we couldn't say that these two shapes are congruent. All right, let's take a look at these and see if these two shapes are congruent. Well, first of all, both pentagons. So that starts us off. We have similarity. Now let's check to see if the corresponding parts are congruent. Let's start with looking at the sides. I look over here to the left and I see a 5. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to find a 5 over here, and I did. Okay. Now it's very important as we go about finding the other pieces can't just be anywhere. They have to be in the right place. So if I look at here, I see a 4 is to the left of the 5. If I do the same thing here, if I look to the left, sure enough, that's 4.5. Now, I'm not ready to stop just yet. What I notice is that the 4 is just above it. Okay, so that's still okay because the shape could just be flipped or rotated. Okay, let's continue on. If next to the 4 is this 2 on the other side, we're still doing okay. So sure enough, there's the 2 right next to the 4, and it's right next to the 3 and the 3 here, and then a 4.5 and a 4.5. So everything is still in order. It's just one's clockwise, one's counterclockwise. That is still good. I need you to understand that. But so far, I've just checked the sides. That doesn't mean the shapes are congruent, okay? That's the first thing. So I have to have sides that correspond that are congruent. That's the first thing. The other thing is the angles. I need to make sure the angles and that they correspond. They're in the right places and they're congruent. Let's go over and look again at this 4 and this 5 and find that there's a single struck angle in between that 4 and 5. If these two figures have any hope of being congruent, I have to find that same angle between the 4 and 5 over here, and I do. Okay, now let's just start looking. Okay, so next to the single struck is this double struck. Now down in this area, that's not expected. I really don't expect it to be there. Here's the reason why. If I go back over to the left, that double struck angle here is between a 4 and a 2, and the 4 and 2 is at the top. So that falls in the right spot. That's a good thing. It's between the 4 and the 2. Between the 2 and the 3 is a triple. So let's go over here and look at 2 and 3. Okay, everything's lining up pretty good so far. Between the 3 and the 4.5 is a 50-degree angle, and sure enough, between the 3 and the 4.5 over here is a 50-degree angle. And then lastly, we have that double struck that falls between the same sides as well. Hey, you know what? These two figures prove to be congruent. All right, let's take a look at this. This is the first of our I can statements. It says I can identify corresponding parts of congruent triangles. Okay, so if you take a look, I've got two triangles here. They're actually caused by two lines that cross each other, creating vertical angles, to be honest. So at the very least, I know at some point these angles are going to have to be congruent. Okay, but we'll get there. Okay. All right, so given two triangles and a statement like this down at the bottom where it says given triangle ABC is congruent to DEC, I need to be able to identify which angles match up, which sides match up. I'm not going to use the drawing to do this. The drawings can be helpful, but I'm going to look at the statement to do it instead. Okay, so if you take a look, you can see that the very first letter on the left-hand side is an A, and that represents this angle up here, angle A. D represents D over here for angle D. Now, since the triangles are told to be congruent, that means their corresponding parts are congruent. Since their corresponding parts are congruent, angle A and angle D have to be congruent. So I'm going to mark this as angle D. Now, if you feel like you know what I just did and you can continue on, you go ahead and put me on pause and use this as an example to check it. But I'm going to continue to go on. Okay, B goes with E, angle E. And then finally, C goes with angle C. And that's what I mentioned earlier about vertical angles. All right, now let's take a look at the sides. Now, if you look at the congruent statement here, I have the first two letters AB, which represents the segment AB. Over here, I have segment DE, which represents the segment DE. All right, so I know that the segment AB is congruent to DE. So let's go ahead and put that in the correct spot here, DE. Okay, now see if you can continue to go on. I'm going to go ahead and walk through it, but you can put me on pause and check your answers if you like. So then I have, let's see, BC and EC. BC goes with AC, okay? So I have EC, I'm sorry, I just said that wrong, EC. Okay, so I have BC and EC go together. And then finally, I can take a look at AC, which is the combination of the first and the last letters, and those two should be congruent. So that gives me AC is congruent to DC. All right, I've correctly identified the corresponding parts. Okay, so now I have a little bit more of a complex drawing here, and so we want to take a look at that. I have a drawing, but I have this fantastic congruent statement where really if I don't have to look at the drawing, I really don't want to look at the drawing. I'm going to look at the congruent statement and just match things up. Okay, so but there's one place I want to pull your attention to. If you take a look at this, it says angle B, and if you go up and look at the drawing where angle B is at, there's actually multiple angles there. There's a red angle, there's a blue angle, and there's a green angle. So it's really improper for me to call that angle B. So let's fix that. Okay, so I'm going to actually call it ABD, just like I have there in the red. It follows the pattern there. All right, so if you take a look at angle D, same thing kind of happens here with angle D. Angle D has two angles that are at it, and it's really not appropriate. It's really three angles because we have the straight angle. But it's not appropriate for us to call it angle D because there's two angles or more there. So let's fix that one. All right, so I called it ADB. Since it's at angle D, or the vertex is at D, I need to make sure that that's in the middle there. Okay, put me on pause, check your answers in just a few moments, and come back and see if you got the same thing as I do. And there you have it. Check those answers. If you're having any trouble, come and see me after school, okay? Now, here's what I need you to do. If you're using the drawing to match things up, you say, hey, this side right here is on this side, so I believe it's going to be congruent to that. Some of these drawings are going to get too difficult to do that, and you're going to start making mistakes. So always refer to the congruent statements for accuracy, okay? All right. Again, if you have any trouble writing your angles or not sure how this is all panning out, you come and see me. All right, here's the last of these kind of examples. Now I don't even have a picture at all, okay? So you're going to have to be able to use the congruent statement to come up with your congruence bits, okay? So go ahead and use that and come back and check your answers. I should see you doing these little bars, like I have a blue and red bar there. You should do that so you're making sure you're getting these things right, okay? Do what it takes to be right. All right, so if you take a look, you might have wrote your letters in different order. I always write my letters in alphabetical order. It just makes things simpler. Let's move on. All right, I can write a congruent statement for corresponding parts of congruent triangles. These triangles are congruent. Now, the sides are marked, and I can identify which sides go with what. But I have to identify, I have to write a congruent statement. That's where I write, in this case, triangle ABC is congruent to some triangle over there. What I always do is I go and mark my angles as being congruent. So if they give me side information, I go and mark my angles congruent. It makes writing the letters in the correct order easier for me. So watch what I, in this case, I just happen to have a single struck angle. I'm going to go and mark, or a side, I'm going to mark the side across from it as a single struck. It's just an organizational thing. And across from the double struck, I'm going to write this one as double struck. Just again, an organizational thing. And then across from the three, I'm going to write a three struck. Now, if I do the same thing with the other triangle, then I believe it helps me be able to write the congruent statement. I just look at the angles and write them in that order. Okay? Go do that with that other triangle. So again, I just looked at the sides and marked the angles with the same kind of similar markings. Now it's time for me to write a congruent statement. Now the first triangle always is in alphabetical order. So I'm going to go A, B, C. Congruent to, now I have to make sure I match up my angles. Angle A matches to angle E. I'm not worried about alphabetical over here. E. And then I go to B. Angle B is a single struck, so it's going to be a D over here. And then for the C, I'm going to match it up with the F. All right, and there's my congruent statement. Okay, always write the very first triangle in alphabetical order and then make sure that the letters in the second one match up correctly. I'm hopeful you found that to be quite easy. So I now want you to go ahead and do this one. So it says two triangles are congruent. C is the midpoint of BC. Write a congruent statement. Okay, first of all, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I take care of what this is. This is information that's hidden from me that I haven't put in the drawing yet. So it says C is the midpoint of BC. And that should say BE. I'm sorry. So let's go ahead and mark that as being a 3 strike since everything else has already been taken. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm looking at the similar problem as the one before. Mark the angles, write your congruent statement. Go ahead and put me on pause and check to see if you know how to do this. Okay, I have triangle ABC. Again, the very first triangle is in alphabetical order. ABC is congruent to DEC. All right, so I did that simply, and I'm just going to show one side. I looked at angle A, which is across from a triple struck, and so I went over to the other triangle, found the triple struck, and looked to see what angle was across from it. And I just matched it up. Moving on. Save the easiest for last. I can mark congruent triangles to show which parts are corresponding. We've done this already, so hopefully you can do this real quick. Go ahead and put me on pause and see if you can do this. There's my sides marked. You might chose different markings, but make sure that your sides, for instance, B and D, have the same marking as M and L, as mine does, and so on. Now I'm going to mark my angles. How'd you do? Can you figure out how I did my markings? How come this one right here has a single strike? What was my thinking on that? Well, it was across from the side that was a single strike. And if I do that, then it makes marking it over here real easy. I just go find the single struck side and mark the single struck angle across from it. Now try this one. Put me on pause. See if you can do this one. There's the sides marked. Hopefully you're now predicting how my marks are going to go. And if you are, then you're understanding my philosophy of how to mark these things. Okay, you have 4 basic problems today. 3 of them are from this section. I'm starting to do review problems now on here. So number 4 is actually find a distance. So I want you to go back if you need to and look at your formula sheet. I want you to review, find the formula, and using the distance formula. You're going to start seeing more and more of those on your try it problem. So this should be an easy problem to get right. Okay, very good. We'll see you next class.